I can't believe you did this to me.
I married the perfect man on a Saturday in October. 6 hours later, in our bed, on the night that was supposed to be just ours, he moaned my sister's name, Mila. His voice was still hoarse when it hit me. I didn't need to ask. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to get up. I walked out of the hotel before sunrise. No ring, no suitcase, not the slightest intention of looking back. What I didn't know was that someone had tried to warn me. A stranger at the cocktail hour, hours before the ceremony. Too handsome, too blunt. I laughed in his face and went off to get married. Weeks later, I found out who he was, and I found out his last name was the same one I was trying to erase from my life. Hi, I'm Kay. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. Mila. I was happy, and that's what made everything worse, because the happiness was still warm inside me when it happened. The room smelled like fresh flowers and starched fabric, and Axton's hand was on my hip, and I thought, with a stupid, beautiful certainty, that this was the first night of the rest of my life. And it was, just not the way I'd imagined. He said her name in the middle of everything, in the middle of us, in the middle of what was supposed to be only mine, Mila. 3 syllables that left his mouth with a familiarity that didn't belong there, because that name wasn't mine, and the body beneath him was mine, and the ring on his finger had been placed there by me 6 hours earlier. His voice was hoarse and low, and carried the weight of a habit, not a mistake, and that's what destroyed me. It wasn't the name itself. It was how natural it was. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked at the same time, and the air stopped halfway between my lungs and my throat. Axton noticed right away. I knew because he stopped too, and the silence that fell between us was so thick I could hear the noise of the city down below, filtered through dozens of floors of concrete and glass. He pulled away slowly. I stayed still, my back to him, staring at the ceiling of the presidential suite of the hotel that bore his last name on the facade. The city lights came through the curtains and drew lines across the ceiling, and I fixed my eyes on them because it was the only thing I could do. "Callie," he said. His voice had changed. It wasn't the voice from before. It was the voice of someone assembling a sentence with care, choosing every word before letting it go. "Callie, look at me." I didn't look. "I didn't say anything," he said, and the sentence came out so smooth, so ready, that I knew it was a lie before I even processed it. Nobody denies something that didn't happen that fast. The denial came too quickly, too rehearsed, too clean. You're on edge. It's been a long day. Your mind is mixing things up. The mattress shifted when he moved closer. His hand touched my shoulder, and my body reacted before my mind did. I pulled back, an inch, but he felt it. "Hey." His voice got softer, and that softness made me nauseous because I knew that tone. It was the tone he used when he wanted to convince me of something, when he wanted me to give in without realizing I was giving in. "I love you. I married you. Nothing happened, okay? You heard wrong." I wanted to believe him, and I hated the part of me that wanted to believe him, because that part was weak, and I needed it quiet right now. I heard what I heard. My sister's name in my husband's mouth, in our bed, on our night. There was no alternative version. There was no angle where that was something else. "Go to sleep, Axton." My voice came out flat. No emotion, no accusation, not the slightest crack, and I saw the effect it had on his face. The confusion, because he'd expected tears, expected screaming, expected anything he could use to prove I was the unstable one in the situation. But I gave him nothing. I turned to the other side and closed my eyes. He stayed silent for a while. I could feel his presence behind me, the body heat, the breathing, the weight on the mattress. He tried one more time, his hand sliding along my arm, his fingers searching for mine. I pulled my hand under the pillow and didn't move. Axton fell asleep. It took less time than I expected, and that detail told me more about him than 3 years of dating and an entire ceremony. A man who moans another woman's name on his wedding night and falls asleep in under 20 minutes is a man who's already made peace with what he is. I was married to someone who slept soundly after destroying everything, because to him, nothing had been destroyed. I was the only one who'd heard it. I waited until his breathing grew heavy and steady, then I got up slowly, placing one foot on the floor at a time, distributing my weight so the mattress wouldn't shift. I crossed the room in the dark and locked the bathroom door behind me without a sound. The marble floor was freezing, and I sat there, my back against the wall, with the wedding dress tossed over the chair on the other side of the door, and the ring still on my finger. The suite was enormous. I knew because I'd helped pick out the decor months before, when I believed I was joining a family and not walking into a trap. The bathroom alone was bigger than any place I'd ever grown up in, and the irony hit me with cruel precision. It was there, sitting on the cold floor of a bathroom that cost more than my parents' apartment in Minneapolis, that the memory came back. The cocktail hour before the ceremony. A blonde man I'd never seen before approached me while I was adjusting the hem of my dress in a corner of the ballroom. Light eyes, a presence far too big for the space between us, and a bluntness that unsettled me on the spot. He said I should be careful. He didn't explain with what, didn't give details, didn't stay long enough for me to ask. I gave him a polite smile, figured he was some drunk or bitter guest, and went off to get married. Now, sitting in the dark, I understood. The warning was real. The stranger knew, and I'd laughed in his face and marched down the white carpet toward the biggest lie of my life. The shame hit me alongside the rage, and the two together were too heavy for my body in that moment. I pressed my hands against my face and breathed until my lungs ached, because crying was not an option. If I started, I wouldn't stop, and I needed to be out of that hotel before daylight. I got dressed in the dark, with whatever clothes I found in the suitcase I'd packed so carefully the night before. I slipped the ring off my finger and set it on the nightstand, next to his watch. I grabbed my phone and my purse. Nothing else. The suitcase stayed. The dress stayed. The life I thought I'd have stayed hanging on the chair along with the tulle and the lace. I opened the suite door without looking back. The hallway was empty, lit by that artificial light luxury hotels use in the middle of the night. Too warm to feel welcoming. Too dim to actually illuminate anything. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. And in those few seconds, the silence of the entire floor pressed down on my back with the weight of everything I was leaving behind. The lobby was deserted. A receptionist behind the counter looked up and saw me. A woman in jeans and a sweater leaving a hotel in the middle of the night where she'd walked in wearing white just hours before. If he thought it was strange, he didn't say a word. I crossed the marble floor with my footsteps echoing too loudly and pushed through the revolving door onto the street. The Chicago air hit me with a cold that cut, and I stopped on the sidewalk with empty hands and a closed throat. The city was awake the way only Chicago is in the dead of night. Traffic lights blinking for no one, the distant sound of a train, the wind coming off the lake, carrying the smell of cold water and metal. I took a deep breath for the first time since I'd heard her name, and the air came in tearing, icy, real. I had no plan, no destination, not a single person in the world who knew what had just happened, but I was on my feet, and I was outside. And the 3 syllables that destroyed everything still echoed inside my head, repeating my sister's name in my husband's voice, while the city kept spinning around a woman who, up until 6 hours ago, thought she knew exactly who she was. Chapter 2. The Stranger. 3 weeks, 21 days between the woman who walked out of a hotel at dawn and the woman who now served coffee with steady hands and a black apron tied around her waist. I had a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Lincoln Park, a job behind the counter at Rowan & Clay, and a life so different from the one before that, sometimes I woke up not knowing which one was the dream. The apartment smelled like paint and old wood, and the furniture was sparse. A bed, a table, 2 chairs that didn't match. The walls needed frames, and the kitchen needed everything, but it was mine. My name on the lease, my money on the rent, my silence when I wanted silence. After 3 years living in spaces that had his last name in every detail, a cramped apartment in a building with no doorman was the safest place in the world. But the 3 weeks hadn't been peaceful. Axton didn't let me go. The messages started the morning after I left. First worried, then insistent, then far too long, full of sentences that sounded reasonable if you didn't pay attention to their structure. I'm worried about you. Nothing you think happened is real. You're confused, and I understand. It was an intense night. Always the same version, repeated with variations small enough to seem natural and constant enough to erode. He called dozens of times. He showed up at the building one night, buzzed the intercom, and stood on the sidewalk for nearly an hour. His voice on the intercom was calm, patient, full of that manufactured sweetness I'd mistaken for love for years. And on the worst days, the days when the exhaustion was too much and the loneliness got loud, I almost believed him. That almost was the most terrifying thing in my life. Because if I gave in, if I let his version replace mine, then I'd lose the only thing I had left. The certainty that I heard what I heard. It was Ren who kept me from sinking. Ren Ashford had been my best friend since college. 27, hair that changed color with every season, and a biological inability to keep any thought to herself for more than 12 seconds. She worked in digital marketing, spoke without a filter, and had a natural flair for drama that in anyone else would have been unbearable. But in her it worked, because it came paired with a fierce loyalty and a protective instinct I'd never seen in anyone else. I called her at 4 a.m. the day I left the hotel. Said I needed a place to stay and couldn't explain why at that moment. Ren didn't ask. In less than a week, she'd found the apartment, negotiated the rent, and talked the owner of Rowan and Clay into giving me the counter job. In the weeks that followed, she became my shield, blocked Axton on my phone, answered the intercom the night he showed up at the building, and sent him away with a vocabulary that was probably heard by the neighbors 3 floors up. That afternoon, Ren had stopped by the cafe before my shift ended, sat on the stool near the counter, and kept me company while I cleaned the espresso machine. She was in the middle of a theory about how the universe owed me at least one decent millionaire with no problematic sisters when the door chime rang. I looked up out of habit, and the world stopped for the second time in 3 weeks. The man who walked in was the stranger from the cocktail hour. And the first thing I thought, before any other reaction, was, how did he find me? I'd changed addresses, switched numbers, left every place connected to my old life. A cafe in Lincoln Park wasn't the kind of place that showed up in a quick search. Someone had really looked. I recognized him before any conscious thought. The height, the broad shoulders, the blonde hair, the light eyes that had stared at me that night with an urgency I'd mistaken for rudeness. He wore a dark suit without a tie, and moved with the ease of someone used to taking up space without asking permission. His presence shifted the balance of the entire cafe. The brick walls, the wooden tables, the long counter. Everything felt smaller when he crossed the threshold. He saw me, and I saw that he recognized me too. Ren noticed something had changed in my face, because she stopped mid-sentence and turned to look. The stranger came to the counter with measured steps, stopped on the other side, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't hesitation. It was something closer to decision. He had come looking for me. You, I said, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. The cocktail hour, before the ceremony. I need to talk to you, he said. His voice was deep, direct, with no attempt to soften what was coming. And who are you? He took a deep breath, a short, loaded pause, and then he said his own name with the clarity of someone who knew exactly the weight of what he was delivering. Jasper Calloway. Calloway. The last name hit me square in the chest with the force of a door slamming. The same last name on the hotel facade. The same last name on my marriage certificate. The same last name I was trying to tear out of my life with both hands. I felt Ren straighten up on the stool beside me, but I didn't look at her. Axton's brother, I said, and it wasn't a question. Younger brother. The silence that settled between us was made of anger. My anger. Because this man knew before the wedding, knew enough to approach me at a cocktail hour. And still I walked up that aisle, and he was there and didn't do enough to stop me. You knew. I dropped the rag I'd been using to wipe the counter, and planted both hands on the wooden surface, leaning forward. At the cocktail hour, you knew what he was doing. I did. And all you did was tell me to be careful? Jasper held my gaze without looking away. He didn't apologize, didn't justify himself, didn't try to soften anything. He stood there, still, taking my anger with an immobility that was either courage or arrogance, and I didn't know which one irritated me more. I should have been more direct, he said. But I tried. You tried, I repeated, and the word came out tasting like acid. Good for you. Worked out great, as you can see. Ren touched my arm, a quick gesture that meant breathe. I breathed, but I didn't back down. What do you want now? I asked. Because if you came to apologize, save it. And if you came on his behalf, you can walk out the same door. I didn't come on anyone's behalf, he said, and his voice didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A thin, controlled tension. I came to tell you what I should have told you that night. The affair between Axton and Milla is real. It's not paranoia. It's not nerves. It's not in your head. It happened. It's been happening for months. The sentence hit me in 2 waves. The first was relief. A relief so brutal my legs almost gave out. Because for 3 weeks Axton had hammered the same version into my head with such persistence that on bad days I questioned my own memory. And now someone was saying I wasn't crazy. That the name was real. That the betrayal was real. The second wave was fury. Because he knew. For months. And I walked into that ceremony knowing nothing. I gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to feel the wood press against my palms. Ren was silent beside me, and Ren being silent was proof the situation was serious. There's more, Jasper said, and the way he said it warned me I wasn't going to like it. Axton won't sign the divorce papers. A public scandal hurts the group's image, and he'd rather keep you trapped in the marriage than risk the reputation. I laughed. It was a dry sound, no humor, that came from somewhere between my throat and my stomach. Trapped. After everything, he still wanted to keep me trapped. And what do you get out of this? I asked, looking Jasper in the eye. Why did you come here? He held my gaze for a second that lasted too long. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed a card on the counter, sliding it toward me with 2 fingers. Declan Mercer. Mercer and Associates. Family and Estate Law. My lawyer, Jasper said. When you're ready to fight, call that number. He didn't wait for a response. He stepped back, looked at Ren, who stared back at him with the expression of someone cataloging every detail for later analysis, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. The door chime rang again, and the sound lingered in the space he'd just left empty. Ren waited a full 5 seconds before turning to me. Callie, she said slowly, with the kind of care that was rare for her. That man just gave you his lawyer's card to fight against his own brother. I looked at the card in my hand. The paper was thick, the letters were simple, and the name printed there represented everything I didn't want to need. Help from someone with the last name Calloway. But Axton wasn't going to let me go. I knew that now with the same certainty I knew what I'd heard that night. He was going to keep me trapped, keep rewriting the story, keep making me doubt until I no longer knew what was real, unless I fought. I tucked the card into my apron pocket and went back to wiping the counter. How did your friend get him to leave? That had been Jasper's question when I mentioned Axton showing up at the building, minutes before he left, when the conversation was already cooling down. She has a creative vocabulary, I answered. Ren smiled, but her eyes were on me, watchful, measuring what I wasn't saying. And what I wasn't saying was simple. I needed that card, and I hated needing it. Chapter 3. Enemy Territory. 2 days later, I was in the elevator of a building that had the name Calloway, engraved in the lobby in bronze letters, riding 42 floors up to ask for help from the brother of the man who destroyed my life. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the alternative was standing still while Axton rewrote history until I no longer recognized my own version of events. And I'd been standing still long enough. The elevator opened onto an entire floor of glass and silence. Jasper's office was minimalist to the point of looking empty. Dark desk, 2 chairs, nothing on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Lake Michigan from an angle that made Chicago look like a scale model, and the November light came in filtered and cold, illuminating everything with the precision of a set designed to intimidate. It worked. Jasper was standing near the window when I walked in, and beside him was a man I'd never seen. Shorter, dark hair, gray suit without a wrinkle, with the posture of someone who spent more time observing than speaking. He looked at me with the clinical attention of someone who assessed cases and people with the same ruler. Callie, this is Declan Mercer, Jasper said, estate and family law attorney, friend since college. He's going to handle your case. Declan extended his hand. The grip was firm, brief, with no attempt at forced warmth. Sit, he said, pointing to the chair across from the desk. We have a lot to cover, and none of it is pleasant. I sat. Jasper stayed standing, leaning against the edge of the window with his arms crossed, and I felt his gaze on my back as Declan opened a folder and began to speak. The legal situation was worse than I'd imagined. The prenup had gaps, clauses drafted so that, in the event of a divorce without agreement, I'd walk away with almost nothing, and a contestation window too short to build a solid defense. But the real problem wasn't the contract. It was what Axton was doing off the page. He's building a narrative, Declan said, and his voice was so devoid of emotion that every word carried twice the weight. For the family, for the partners, for anyone who asks. The official version is that you had an emotional breakdown on your wedding night and abandoned the marriage for no reason. He's the abandoned husband. You're the unstable wife. The sentence hit me with the precision of something I'd already suspected, but hadn't heard said out loud. The gaslighting Axton had done to me in private, you heard wrong, you're confused, nothing happened, was now public. He wasn't just lying to me. He was building a version of reality where I was the crazy one, the irrational one, the woman who threw away a perfect marriage over a paranoid fantasy. And if I brought up Mila, no one would believe me, because he'd already laid the groundwork. Mila isn't mentioned anywhere, Declan continued. In no conversation, no statement, no version he tells. As far as the world is concerned, she doesn't exist in this story. I looked at Jasper. He was looking back at me with an expression I was beginning to recognize. The tight jaw, the still eyes, the restraint of someone holding a great deal behind very little movement. And what are you proposing? I asked. I'm gathering evidence, Jasper said, pushing off the window and taking 2 steps toward the desk. Hotel records, messages, dates. But I don't have enough yet. I need time. How much time? A few days. 2 weeks at the most. I looked at Declan, then at Jasper, and felt the weight of what was happening. 2 men with power, resources, and connections, offering to solve the problem for me, and a part of me, the part that was exhausted from fighting alone, wanted to let them. But I'd already made the mistake of handing decisions over to a Calloway. I wasn't going to do it again. "I'll accept the help," I said, and I saw something shift in Jasper's eyes, a tension that loosened for half a second before returning. "But on one condition. I decide what happens and when. I'm not going to be a pawn on any Calloway's chessboard. Any of them." The last part was aimed at Jasper, and he understood. He didn't respond. He simply tilted his head in a minimal gesture that could have been agreement, or could have been the acknowledgement that arguing wouldn't get him anywhere. Declan looked from one of us to the other, with the unreadable expression of someone who'd seen this dynamic before, and preferred not to comment. I spent another 40 minutes in the office, while Declan walked me through timelines, strategies, and possible scenarios. Jasper was silent for most of it, but I felt his presence at the edge of my field of vision, constant and impossible to ignore. When I stood to leave, he stepped ahead and opened the office door for me. His hand moved toward my back to guide me down the hallway, an automatic, almost unconscious gesture, but stopped inches from my skin. I felt the warmth of his fingers in the air between us, and neither of us said a word. In the elevator, alone, I leaned my head against the steel wall and closed my eyes. My heart was racing, and I wanted to believe it was the meeting, the pressure, the anger, but I knew it wasn't just that. 2 days later, I was back in enemy territory, but this time the setting was an art gallery in River North, with white walls, warm lighting, and waiters circulating with champagne flutes nobody there actually needed. The Prescott Gallery benefit was hosted by the Calloway Group, and Jasper had convinced me to go with a simple argument. If I hid, Axton's narrative gained traction. I needed to be seen. I needed to show I wasn't the unstable woman he'd painted me as. The dress was borrowed from Wren, black, fitted in the right places, with the understated elegance of something that didn't scream, but didn't apologize either. I walked into the gallery beside Jasper and felt the stares before I saw the faces. That world had been mine for 3 years. The luxury, the power, the smiles that were more performance than affection. I knew it from the inside. But now I was a visitor, not a wife, and the difference was in the way people looked away half a second too fast. Jasper walked beside me with the ease of someone who'd belonged in that space since before he could walk. I didn't belong, but I refused to show it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Wren, live report, please. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you want to burn the place down?" I put the phone away without answering and almost smiled. Almost. I was standing near an installation made of light and steel when Axton appeared. He crossed the gallery toward me with a measured stride, and the perfect smile of a man who knew exactly how large the audience around him was. He came up to me and stopped close, too close, with his body angled toward mine in a way that, to any observer, would look like concerned intimacy. "Callie?" His voice was low, soft, full of a rehearsed sadness that made me want to step back. "I know you're angry, but I need you to know I haven't given up on us." His hand touched my arm, and the touch was gentle, deliberate, positioned so that anyone watching would see a husband reaching out to his wife. It was theater, every gesture calculated, every word measured, every pause in the right place. The man who denied the affair in our bed was now playing the devastated husband in public, and the worst part was that he was good at it. "Get your hand off me," I said, my voice low enough not to draw attention and firm enough to leave no room. "And don't talk about us like it exists." Axton smiled, that sad smile he used when he wanted to look vulnerable, and stepped back with his hands raised in a gesture of false surrender. But the message was sent. To any guest who'd seen the scene, he was the man who tried, and I was the woman who rejected him. My phone buzzed again. "If he touches you one more time, I'm showing up with a pair of garden shears." Not a metaphor. This time I almost laughed out loud and had to cover it with a sip from the glass a waiter had just handed me. Then I saw Milla, not in the main gallery, in the back. I'd left the room to breathe, following a side hallway that led to the restrooms, and the door to a private room was slightly ajar. The light inside was low, and I almost walked right past, but the perfume stopped me. Sweet, floral, too strong. The same perfume Milla had worn since she was 16, and that I'd smelled in hundreds of hugs before I knew what it really meant. I looked through the gap. Axton had his back against the wall, and Milla stood in front of him, too close for any version of innocence. His hand was on her face, his thumb tracing her jawline with the same intimacy I knew, the same gesture he used to do with me. And Milla had her eyes closed, and her head tilted into his palm, with the surrender of someone who'd been there 1,000 times. He said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed softly, and the sound went through me like glass. My sister, 24 years old, Hair she always wore down because she knew it looked good that way, and that soft smile I'd known since she was a child, the smile that was now a weapon, and my husband's hand on her face with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for months. I stepped back before they could see me. The hallway was empty, and I pressed my back against the wall and breathed through closed lips until my stomach stopped clenching. When I returned to the main room, my legs were steady, my eyes dry, my anger cold. Minutes later, Milla appeared in the main gallery, alone, far from Axton, on the opposite side of the room, as if the two of them had never crossed paths that evening. The coordination was too precise to be accidental. He played the worried husband, she played the innocent sister, and I was the only person there who'd seen what was happening behind the half-open door. Milla came up to me with the ease of someone who hadn't just walked out of a dark room with my husband's face between her hands. "Callie," she said, and her voice was sweet, almost gentle, with that tone of concern she knew how to modulate to the exact degree. "I've been trying to talk to you. I know you're going through a hard time, and I want you to know I'm here for you." The line was perfect. The tone was perfect. And the poison was that she thought I didn't know, that the innocent sister could walk up with clean hands while her perfume still carried the warmth of his skin. I looked at Milla for a second long enough for her smile to start to falter, and then I said, with a calm that surprised me, "I saw you with Axton in that room, Milla, and there was nothing innocent about it. If I'm going through a hard time, I think you already know why." The smile disappeared, not all at once. It died at the corners, like a candle being pinched out between someone's fingers. Milla opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a ready answer. I didn't wait for her to find one. I turned my back and walked toward the other side of the gallery, my heart pounding too hard and my hands perfectly still at my sides. Across the room, I saw Jasper. He was standing near one of the pieces, a glass in his hand that I doubted had touched his lips, his eyes locked on me with an intensity I felt before I processed. Beside him, Declan watched the same scene with the professional detachment of someone who assessed risk for a living. I saw Declan tilt his head toward Jasper and say something. His lips moved, quick, discreet, without taking his eyes off the gallery. Jasper didn't react. He didn't look away, didn't respond, didn't move. And his stillness, from that distance, told me more than any sentence would have. I stopped on the other side of a glass sculpture that distorted the reflections of anyone passing by and looked toward the back of the gallery. Axton was there, near the exit, glass in hand, and eyes fixed on me and Jasper. His face was calm, controlled, but the look wasn't jealousy. It was calculation. He was watching the two of us, measuring the distance between us, logging every detail to use later. And I understood that, for Axton, this wasn't about wanting me back. It was about not letting me go. Chapter 4. Crossfire. 4 days passed between the gallery and the moment Axton decided that the public performance wasn't enough. I left my shift at Rowan & Clay in the middle of the day, my apron folded inside my bag, and the smell of coffee still on my hands. And he was there, on the sidewalk, leaning against the hood of a black car that gleamed too much for that street in Lincoln Park, with the posture of someone who'd been waiting long enough to have rehearsed every word of what he was about to say. There was no audience anymore, no gallery, just him, me, and the narrow stretch of sidewalk where nobody knew us. "Callie," he said, and the voice was the same as always, calm, patient. With that inflection of controlled sadness, he modulated as easily as someone adjusting the volume on a radio. "I know you don't want to see me, but I need to talk to you." I didn't stop walking. I passed him with my eyes fixed on the corner and my apartment keys already in my hand, but Axton pushed off the car and walked beside me, matching my pace with the ease of someone strolling with his wife on a Sunday morning. "Your whole family is worried," he said, and the tone was so convincing that for a split second I almost looked at him. "Your mother called me. Milla cries every night because of the accusations you made. You're destroying your own family over something that didn't happen." I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because the mention of my mother caught me in a place I wasn't guarding. Axton noticed right away, because he always noticed where the armor was thinnest. "I love you, Callie," he said, and took a step closer. His face was less than 3 feet from mine, and I could see every detail. The brown eyes I once thought were beautiful, the strong jaw, the pained expression he put on and took off as needed. "You made up a story in your head, and now you're throwing away everything we built. And to make it worse, you're getting involved with my brother out of revenge." The sentence was a trap with 3 layers. The first tried to make me doubt what I heard. The second tried to make me feel guilty about my family. The third tried to turn Jasper into a weapon against me. If I was with his brother, everything I said became revenge instead of truth. And for 1 second, a single second that still shames me, The doubt settled in, not about what I heard, because I heard it, and I knew I heard it, but about myself, about the possibility that I was destroying everything out of pride, that my memory had distorted something, that there existed a world where I was the villain of this story. His insistence was so constant, so patient, so unshakable, that it worked not through logic, but through exhaustion. He didn't need to convince me he was right. He just needed to convince me I wasn't sure. That second lasted long enough to terrify me, because if Axton managed to plant the doubt, he wouldn't need anything else. The doubt would do the rest on its own. I breathed. I looked at him with dry eyes and a steady voice, even though my hands inside my coat pockets were shaking. I'm not going to argue on the street, Axton. Callie, please. I heard what I heard, and you know I heard it. This conversation is over. I turned my back and walked to the corner without looking behind me. I raised my arm and hailed a cab with a gesture that came out steadier than I felt. I got into the back seat, shut the door, and only then let my hands come out of my pockets. They were trembling, the fingers, the wrists, the heels of my palms, not from fear, from rage, from having almost given in. I gave the driver the address and leaned my forehead against the cold glass of the window while Chicago passed by outside, gray and indifferent. Jasper's penthouse was in Gold Coast, in a glass and steel building where the elevator was private, and required a code he'd texted me when I called from the cab saying I needed to talk to him. I didn't go out of attraction. I went for sanity. I needed someone to look at me and tell me I wasn't losing my mind. The elevator opened directly into the living room, a wide space in dark tones, low furniture, and an entire wall of glass that showed the city from an angle that made everything down below look small and manageable, the opposite of how I felt. Jasper was in the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and a glass of water in his hand. He saw me step out of the elevator and set the glass on the marble counter before walking toward me. He didn't say anything. He stood 2 steps away, watching me with that still, intense attention I was already starting to recognize as his way of asking without using words. Axton was waiting for me outside the cafe, I said, and my voice came out lower than I intended. After my shift, on the sidewalk, alone, no audience this time. Jasper went still, but something changed in his face, a minimal contraction around his eyes, the jaw tightening slowly, like a screw turning. I'd seen irritation in him before. I'd seen the rigid composure and the calculated silence, but this was different. This was anger, real, personal, old, the anger of someone who'd known Axton since before he had memories, and knew exactly what he was capable of. What did he say? What he always says, that I made it up, that the family's worried, that Mila cries because of me. I laughed without humor, a short sound that scraped my throat. And that I'm getting involved with you out of revenge. Jasper didn't look away from my eyes. He didn't move, didn't cross his arms, didn't breathe any deeper. But the anger was there, in the tendons of his neck, in the rigid shoulders, in the way the fingers of his right hand curled at his side. He's not getting near you again, he said, and his voice was low, controlled, with the pressure of something being held back by choice and not by lack of strength. I'll handle it, I answered. I didn't ask for protection. I came here because I stopped. Because the sentence about to come out was, because I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy, and I refused to say that out loud. It was humiliating enough to know Axton had gotten close enough to make me doubt. Admitting it to someone else was too much. Jasper took a step toward me, a single step, which closed the distance between us to less than what was safe. I could feel the warmth coming off him, different from Axton's warmth, which was performance. Jasper's was presence, constant, quiet, too large for the space between us. You're not crazy, he said, and his voice was so close I felt the vibration of it in the air before I processed the words. What he did is real. What he's doing now is the worst part, and you're the sanest person I know. I looked at him, and made the mistake of glancing at his mouth for half a second. The distance between us was wrong, too close for conversation, too far for anything else. His body leaned toward me, and I felt the motion like a current in the air, pulling, and something inside me gave way, not reason, but resistance. The urge to step back became weaker than the urge to stay. He brought his hand to my face. His fingers touched the side of my jaw with a lightness that didn't match the size of his hand, and his thumb grazed the skin just below my ear. The touch traveled through me, a shiver that ran from the back of my neck to the base of my spine and settled with an insistence that startled me. I pulled back, half a step, and his hand hung suspended in the air between us before falling to his side. The loss of his touch was almost physical. I felt my skin cool where his fingers had been. I'm not going to be another woman who falls blindly for a Calloway, I said, and my voice was steady, but my heart was nowhere close. Jasper didn't respond. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. It could have been pain, could have been admiration, could have been the realization that I was right, and he hated it. He stepped back and shoved his hands into his pockets, and I saw the effort it took him to restore the distance I'd reestablished. "I want to meet with Axton," I said, because I needed to change the subject before the memory of his touch kept me from thinking. "And Milla, in person, with the evidence on the table. No go-betweens." Jasper's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed, his head tilted to the side, and I saw the no forming before he opened his mouth. "That's a terrible idea. I'm doing it either way." He looked at me for a long moment. I held his gaze without blinking, without backing down, without offering an alternative. And I saw the exact moment he understood that arguing wouldn't change a thing, and that this was precisely the quality that made it impossible for him to look away from me. "I'll be there," he said, and it wasn't a request for permission. 2 days later, I was sitting in a private dining room at the back of Restaurant 11, with Declan beside me, and a calm in my hands that didn't match what was about to happen. The room was discreet, table for 6, doors that closed, soundproofing, and it smelled of dark wood and leather. Declan had a manila envelope in front of him, and the posture of someone who'd done this before. Axton and Milla arrived together. He walked in first, suit impeccable, wearing the expression of someone who expected to control the direction of the conversation. Milla came behind in a light dress, hair down, that soft smile on her face, and for an instant I saw my little sister, the girl I'd shared a room with in Minneapolis, before I saw the woman who shared a bed with my husband. The instant passed quickly. Axton sat across from me and started talking before the chair stopped moving. "I came because I believe we can still work this out between us," he said, with that rehearsed voice, measured, full of false concessions. "No lawyers, no fights. I love you, Callie." I opened my mouth to respond, but the door opened behind me. Axton raised his eyes, and I saw his face change. The mask dropped for half a second, long enough for me to see the real surprise before he composed himself. Jasper walked in with a folder in his hand. I hadn't expected it. He hadn't told me he was bringing material. He walked to the table with the heavy calm of someone who knew exactly what he was carrying, and sat beside me, placing the folder between us. "What is that?" Axton asked, and for the first time his voice had a fracture, thin, almost invisible, but I heard it. Jasper opened the folder. Inside was the dossier Declan had assembled. Hotel records. Rooms booked under fake names on dates spanning months before the wedding. Recovered messages between Axton and Milla, with timestamps and content. Dates, locations, frequency, everything documented with the clinical precision of someone who knew it would end up in front of a judge or a board. "It's all there," Jasper said, and his voice was deep, low, stripped of any emotion that could be mistaken for revenge. "Dates, locations, records. Either you sign the divorce now, or this goes to the group's board tomorrow morning." Axton looked at the folder, looked at Jasper, looked at me. His jaw tightened, and I watched the muscles in his face move as he assembled and discarded responses in his head. Milla, beside him, wasn't looking at the folder. She was looking at her own hands in her lap. "This is fabricated," Axton said, but his voice no longer had the same firmness. "You're going to believe my brother over me?" He looked at me as he said it, and I saw the strategy. Isolate Jasper as the manipulator, cast me as the naive victim who'd been duped by the younger brother. One last attempt, one last version. I didn't answer him. I looked at Milla. "Look at me," I said, and my voice came out low, steady, without a tremor. Milla raised her eyes slowly, and I saw something there that almost made me falter. Not remorse, but fear. Fear of being seen. "I shared a room with you for 18 years. I lent you money when you needed it. I defended you to Mom when she said you'd never amount to anything. And you did this." Milla didn't respond. The soft smile had disappeared, and in its place was a blank face I didn't recognize. I turned to Axton. "You told me I heard wrong, told me I was confused, that it was nerves, that it was in my head. You repeated it for 3 weeks, every day, until I almost believed it. And that was the cruelest part of everything you did. It wasn't the affair. It was trying to convince me the affair didn't exist." Axton opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the folder again, at Jasper, at Declan, who watched him with the unshakable composure of someone who'd seen many powerful men cornered by their own lies. The silence in the room lasted long enough for me to hear the clock on the wall. Declan placed the divorce papers on the table beside the folder and slid a pen toward Axton without saying a word. Axton signed, quick, angry strokes, with the pressure of someone breaking something inside himself with every letter. When he finished, he shoved the papers toward Declan and stood up. He stopped at the door, turned to me, and I saw something on his face that wasn't pain or regret. It was the fury of someone who'd lost a game he thought he'd already won. "You'll always be the one who wasn't enough," he said, and walked out. Mila went after him without a word. The door closed, and the air in the room became lighter and heavier at the same time. I looked at my hands on the table. They were still. For the first time in weeks, they were still. But his sentence stayed. I felt it lodge somewhere between my chest and my stomach, in the space where the things I knew weren't true but hurt anyway lived. Declan put the papers into the folder and zipped it shut with the efficiency of someone closing a case. He looked at me across the table and said, with the dry, precise voice I was already learning to associate with his presence, "Remind me never to be on the wrong side of a conversation with you." I almost smiled. Almost. In the car, no one spoke. Jasper drove with his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel, and I looked out the window as Chicago passed by with the usual rush of a city that didn't care what had just happened inside a private room at a high-end restaurant. Freedom should have tasted like victory, but it tasted like ash, the taste of things that cost too much to celebrate. Chapter 5. Her Choice. The next morning, I signed my name for the last time as Callie Calloway and watched the ink dry on the paper with the strange feeling that I should have been feeling more than I was. Declan's office was understated, floor-to-ceiling shelves of law books, a dark wood desk with organized stacks, natural light coming in through a narrow window that showed a strip of gray sky. Different from the luxury of Calloway Tower, functional and straightforward, with no pretension of impressing anyone. Declan was on the other side of the desk, documents lined up, and a pen he spun between his fingers with the automatism of someone who'd been doing it for years while waiting on signatures. Jasper wasn't there, and I didn't ask why. This was between me and the paper. Between me and the end of a version of my life that had started dying, the night I heard my sister's name in my husband's mouth. Ex-husband. The word still sounded strange, misshapen, too big to fit in the mouth of someone who'd walked out of a ceremony just over a month ago. "The hard part is done," Declan said, collecting the documents with the precise efficiency of someone closing out an operation. "His signature is valid, the terms were accepted without contestation, and the dossier ensures he won't back out. The process still takes a few weeks to be finalized, but in practice, it's over. He gave up everything to keep it from reaching the board. You're free. Free." The word should have carried a different weight, should have come with relief, with a feeling of open space, of a possible future. But what I felt was a strange, heavy emptiness. The exact combination of relief and grief that comes when you lose something you no longer wanted, but that for years had been the entire structure of your life. He didn't go quietly, Declan continued, filing the folder in the drawer. Cut contact with Jasper, sent a short message, no goodbye, and blocked the number. Threatened to sue me for professional misconduct. His tone didn't change, but the corner of his mouth lifted a millimeter. No legal basis whatsoever. More noise than anything else. "And now?" I asked. "Now he's with his mother, Eloise Calloway. He won't disappear." He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the dry candor I already associated with every sentence that came out of him. "But as of today, he no longer has power over you. The truth exists. It's documented, and it can't be erased." I nodded, not because I felt safe, but because I needed to believe it was true, that the power Axton had held over me, the power to make me doubt, to rewrite reality, to keep me trapped in a version of the story only he controlled, was over, at least on paper. The office door opened, and Wren came in with the energy of someone who'd sprinted the last 2 blocks and didn't care to hide it. Her hair, which that month was a shade of copper she insisted on calling Vengeful Autumn, was pulled up in a crooked bun, and she wore a denim jacket over a floral dress that had no business existing in that temperature. "It's done?" she asked, looking from me to Declan with wide eyes. "It's done," I said. Wren hugged me. It was a tight, long hug, her arms around my shoulders, and her chin tucked on top of my head, and I closed my eyes and let her warmth hold me for a moment, before I remembered to breathe. When she pulled back, her eyes were glistening, but her mouth was already assembling the next sentence. "All right," she said, sitting on the edge of the chair beside me with the posture of someone about to run a meeting. "Now we need to celebrate. I have ideas. Wren, first, we burn the wedding dress, in a ritual, with candles, ambient music, and maybe a bonfire in my aunt's backyard in Evanston. Second, we rent a limo, buy 4 pizzas, and eat them all in the back seat while we loop Michigan Avenue. Third, and this is my favorite, we make you a dating profile with the bio, freshly divorced, accepting flowers and apologies." Declan, who'd been putting papers away on the shelf behind the desk, stopped mid-motion and looked at Wren with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between bewilderment and a reluctant curiosity. I almost laughed. Almost. The laugh got stuck somewhere between my throat and my chest, where the relief still hadn't reached, and what came out was a small smile that Ren accepted as a victory. "Pizza in the limo," I said, "but no dating profile. For now," Ren corrected, raising a finger. That night, I was alone. The Lincoln Park apartment was dark, and I sat on the couch with my legs folded under me and a glass of water in my hand that I didn't remember picking up. The city outside the window made its usual sounds: distant traffic, a siren, the wind rattling the building's old window panes, and the silence inside the apartment was too large for the size of the space. I was free. The divorce was signed. Axton no longer had any legal power over me, and the truth existed in documents no one could deny. Everything I'd fought to achieve over the past weeks was there, concluded, finalized, real, and I felt empty. It wasn't missing him. I didn't miss Axton, not the man he was, not the marriage that was never what I thought it was. What I missed was the certainty, the feeling of knowing where my life was headed, of having a plan, a structure, a direction. Before the marriage, I was Callie Brennan, interior design student with a career ahead of her. After the marriage, I was Callie Calloway, wife of someone important, living in places that weren't mine, surrounded by a world that never belonged to me. And now I was Callie Brennan again. But the woman who'd had that name before no longer existed. She died in a hotel suite, along with 3 syllables, and the woman left in her place still didn't know who she was. I thought about Jasper. The memory came uninvited, his hand on my face in the penthouse, his warm fingers against my skin. The moment I pulled back and saw something in his eyes that made me wish I hadn't. I thought about the way he'd walked into the restaurant with the folder in his hand, unannounced, uninvited, with the quiet resolve of someone who refused to stand on the sidelines while I fought alone. I thought about his voice saying, "You're not crazy," with so much conviction that for 1 second I believed it with my entire body. And I thought about the last name, Calloway, the same last name I'd just torn out of my life. Wanting Jasper meant walking back toward everything I was trying to leave behind. The same world, the same family, the same ballrooms, and the same lies. It meant going back to a place that had hurt me, and believing this time would be different. And I'd done that before. I'd already trusted, already given myself over, already ignored a stranger's warning and walked up an aisle toward a sham. But Jasper wasn't Axton. I knew that. Knew it by the way he brought the truth instead of hiding it, by the way he respected my terms instead of working around them, by the way he stepped back when I pulled away instead of pushing. Knowing that didn't make the decision easier. It just made the cowardice harder to justify. The intercom buzzed. I got up from the couch and walked to the wall where the unit hung, old, beige, with a button that stuck when it was cold. I pressed the button and waited. "It's me," Jasper's voice said, and the sound came through muffled by the cheap intercom, but I recognized it on the first syllable. I unlocked the building door and waited in the doorway of the apartment, listening to his footsteps climbing the 3 flights of stairs with no elevator. He appeared on the landing in a dark coat, his broad shoulders filling the entire width of the narrow hallway, his breathing slightly quickened from the climb. He stopped in front of me, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I'd seen in the penthouse, the intensity, the restraint, the desire to speak being held back by something I still hadn't fully understood. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said, and his voice was deep, low, carrying the weight of words that had been chosen before he left home. "I came to say something, and then you decide what to do with it." I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe and crossed my arms. Not out of hostility, out of protection, because I knew that whatever came next was going to change something, and I needed to be braced for the size of the change. "I'm not my brother," Jasper said. "I know you know that, but I need to say it out loud because if I don't, that shadow will stay between us forever. What I feel for you isn't guilt. It's not redemption. It's not an attempt to fix what he broke. It's something else. And that something else started before I had any right to feel it." He stopped, breathed. His eyes didn't leave mine for a single moment, and I saw the effort that exposure was costing him. A man accustomed to controlling everything, dropping his guard at the door of a 3rd-floor walk-up. For a woman who had every reason in the world to send him away. "You're the only person who's ever looked at me and seen something beyond a last name," he said. "And I don't know what to do with that, but I know I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist." The hallway was silent. The ceiling light flickered with the irregularity of an old building, and the air smelled like cold floors and peeling paint. And nothing about that setting matched the man standing in front of me. But he was there, not in his world, in mine. He'd climbed 3 flights of stairs, buzzed an intercom that stuck, and stood in a narrow hallway saying things I knew he'd never said to anyone else. I could have sent him away, could have said it was too soon, that I needed time, that the last time I trusted a man with that last name, I left a hotel at dawn with no suitcase and no ring. All of it was true. All of it was valid. And none of it was strong enough to erase what I felt when he looked at me that way. Without calculation, without performance, without any rehearsed version of what I was supposed to hear. "I'm staying," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, because the decision wasn't born from impulse. It was born from the exhaustion of being afraid, from the recognition that running was easier but not safer, and from the simple certainty that, for the first time, someone had chosen me knowing exactly who I was, with the flaws, with the anger, with the shame of not having listened when I should have, and I was choosing him back. Jasper didn't say anything, but something happened in his face. His shoulders dropped a centimeter, the tension around his eyes dissolved, and he breathed. Not a sigh, a long, deep breath, the kind of breath from someone who'd been holding the air in, and only now remembered he needed it. I reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine with a firmness that was both care and need at the same time, and I felt the warmth of his palm against mine with the clarity of something that was beginning, not ending. The hallway was still narrow, the light was still flickering, and Chicago was still making noise outside, but his hand in mine was warm, and real, and chosen, and for the first time in weeks, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a question I finally wanted to answer. Chapter 6. By Choice. The following night, I was in Jasper's penthouse, and the silence between us had a different texture from every other silence that had ever existed in that space. It wasn't the tense silence of the first time I'd been there, when my hands were shaking and the anger filled every corner of my body. It wasn't the loaded silence of the almost kiss, when the distance between us was a border I'd refused to cross. It was a clean, open silence, the silence of two people who'd already said everything that needed to be said, and were now in the space that comes after words. The city glowed on the other side of the glass wall, and the room was dark, lit only by Chicago's lights coming in and casting long shadows on the floor. Jasper was standing near the balcony with a glass in his hand that he hadn't brought to his lips once, and I was sitting on the arm of the couch with my shoes on the floor and my bare feet on the cold rug, and between us there were 10 feet of space and a gravity that pulled. "You're quiet," I said. "I'm trying not to ruin this," he answered, without turning. His voice was low, honest, without a single layer of irony or control, and that vulnerability in him, in a man I'd watched face down his own brother with a calm that chilled, disarmed me more than any words could have. I stood up from the arm of the couch and walked to him. Every step was a decision. I was walking into this with my eyes open, without illusion, without the convenient excuse of being caught off guard. I knew who he was, knew the last name, knew the world he came from, knew the risk, and I was going anyway. Not because the risk didn't exist, but because for the first time I was choosing the risk instead of running from it. I stopped in front of Jasper, close enough to see how the city light traced the outline of his face and lit up the pale eyes that watched me with an intensity I felt on my skin before I processed it in my head. I took the glass from his hand and set it on the table beside us, and the gesture was so deliberate that he understood what it meant before I said a word. "Callie," he said, and my name in his voice sounded different from every time before. Lower, closer, with the weight of something he'd been holding for too long. I placed my hand on his chest. I felt the fabric of his shirt, and beneath it, the warmth, the heartbeat, steady, fast, faster than his composure let on. He was nervous. Jasper Calloway, the man who walked into rooms and rearranged the balance of power with his presence, was nervous because of my hand on his chest, and that discovery gave me a courage I didn't know I had. I kissed him. He wasn't the one who moved first. I was. I rose onto my toes and put my mouth on his, and the first second was soft. A touch, a question. Then his hands answered. One went to my waist with a firmness that pulled me against his body, and the other traveled up my back to the nape of my neck, his fingers threading into my hair with a possessiveness he didn't try to hide. His mouth opened against mine, and the kiss changed, became deeper, more urgent, with the contained hunger of someone who'd been waiting for permission and had finally received it. I tasted him, felt the heat of his tongue against mine, the pressure of his fingers at my nape, and the world shrank to that point of contact, mouth against mouth, body against body, his heart beating against my palm. He pushed me slowly backward without stopping the kiss, guiding with his hip and the hand on my back, until my legs found the edge of the bed in a room I didn't remember crossing into. I sat on the edge and he stood for a moment, looking at me with an expression that made me stop breathing. Desire and care mixed in a proportion I didn't know existed. He pulled his shirt over his head in one quick motion, and I saw the broad shoulders, the chest, the line of his abdomen muscles that contracted when he took a deep breath. He was solid, present, real in a way that ached and anchored me at the same time. He lowered himself, braced one knee on the bed beside me, and laid me down with a hand behind my back, coming down with me without rushing. His weight on me was warm and firm. It didn't crush, it enveloped, and I felt every point where his body met mine with a clarity that made me close my eyes. His mouth traveled down my neck, and the warmth of his breath on my skin drew a sound out of me that I hadn't planned and couldn't hold back. "Look at me," he said against my collarbone, his voice hoarse, and I opened my eyes and found his inches from mine. "I need you to be here." "I'm here," I said, and it was true. For the first time, I was completely present beneath someone, without the fear that the person above me was another version of themselves, without the shadow of a wrong name, without the doubt. I was there by choice, and the choice made every touch more intense, every breath deeper, every inch of skin against skin more real. He entered me slowly, his eyes on mine, and I felt the fullness of him fill me with a deliberate slowness that made me arch my back and grip his shoulders with both hands. The rhythm he set was steady and deep, and each movement reached me in a place that went beyond the body, a place where pleasure and trust blurred and became the same thing. I tightened my legs around him and pulled his body closer, and he let out a low sound against my neck that traveled through me completely. "Callie," he said, and my name sounded different from every other name that had ever been said in that position. It sounded right. It sounded mine. It sounded like the only word he could remember. The tension built in waves, each one higher than the last, and I lost myself in it, in the pressure of his body, in the heat between us, in the breathing that quickened alongside the movements, in the sound of our bodies meeting in a rhythm that was no longer controlled. I broke first, my body clenching in spasms that stole my breath and made me hold his face between my hands. He followed moments later, his body going taut, a deep sound against my mouth, his arms trembling beside my head before he collapsed onto me with the weight of someone who had finally let go of what he'd been holding. We stayed there. I felt his heart against my chest, the two beating out of sync, and his fingers in my hair tracing slow lines that went nowhere. I placed my hand on his back, broad, warm, the muscles still tense beneath the skin, and felt his body relax into my touch, inch by inch, until his weight on me stopped being pressure and became presence. And I understood, right there, with his skin against mine and the whole city glowing on the other side of the glass, that this wasn't relief, it wasn't revenge, it wasn't consolation, it wasn't the body trying to erase what the mind still remembered. It was the first time I'd given myself to someone knowing exactly who the person with me was, and knowing they knew exactly who I was. No illusion, no blindfold, just choice. The next morning, the autumn light came through the bedroom window at a low, golden angle that made everything softer. The rumpled sheets, the misplaced pillows, the clothes scattered across the floor in a trail that led from the living room to the bed. I woke up to the space beside me empty, and the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. I found his shirt on the floor near the door, pulled it on over my underwear, and walked through the penthouse following the smell. The kitchen opened onto the living room, all in shades of gray and steel, and Jasper stood with his back to me, shirtless, his broad shoulders framed against the light pouring through the glass wall, working on something at the marble counter with the ease of someone who made coffee every morning that way, barefoot, calm, with a domesticity that didn't match any version of him I'd known until then. He heard my footsteps and looked over his shoulder. His eyes traveled from my face to the shirt and back, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile that warmed me more than the coffee would have. "Nice choice of outfit," he said. "It was the closest thing to the floor," I answered, sitting on the tall stool on the other side of the counter. "Don't take it as a compliment to your wardrobe." He set a cup in front of me, black, no sugar, the way I drank it, and that he had no reason to know, except that he'd been paying attention the day he showed up at the cafe. I picked up the cup, and the warmth of the ceramic in my hands felt good, solid, present. I took the first sip, and let the morning silence exist for a moment before speaking. "It feels strange," I said, looking at the coffee in the cup. "Being here, being like this, without any crisis to solve." "It does," he agreed, leaning his hip against the counter and holding his own cup with both hands. But I adjust fast. The phone buzzed in the pocket of the shirt I was wearing. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Ren. A string of 4 messages in under a minute. "You didn't sleep at home. I'm trying to be mature and respect your space. Failed. Tell me everything. Scale of 1 to 10? Is he worth the last name?" I laughed. It was a real laugh, not the almost laugh of the past weeks. not the contained smile I offered when Ren tried to pull me out of the darkness. It was a laugh that came from deep in my chest and surprised me with how easy it was. And the sound filled the kitchen and made Jasper raise an eyebrow. "Ren," I said, showing him the screen. Jasper read it over the rim of his cup. The eyebrow climbed another half-centimeter. "Worth the last name?" he repeated, with a dry tone that almost hid the amusement underneath. "I'm not answering without a lawyer present," I said, and put the phone away before he could see the response I was already composing in my head. The morning continued with the strange lightness of something that should have been complicated and wasn't. Coffee, comfortable silence, the golden light shifting through the kitchen as time passed without hurry. I ate a piece of toast leaning against the counter while Jasper read something on his phone with a furrowed brow. Probably work. Probably something involving numbers and decisions that affected people on 3 continents. And the domesticity of the moment was so absurdly normal that I had to stop and register it. I was happy. The feeling was so unfamiliar after weeks of war that I almost didn't recognize it. Hey, Kay here. That's it for book 1. But guess what? Book 2 is already done. You can grab access to it for just a small fee. Belonging to someone had never been safe for me. But with Jasper, it was different. Or so I told myself every morning, trying to believe it, until a photo tore everything in two. Him with another woman, in a place I didn't recognize, with a smile I'd never been given. The caption, "The second Calloway has secrets too." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did the only thing I know how to do when the pain is too much. I packed. But this time, he got there first. And the secret he'd been keeping was something that could destroy the entire family. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Unfortunately, many people have been downloading our audio, effectively copying the entire story, and simply reposting it on YouTube. If you want to watch the original story and be the first to catch the upcoming ones, look for Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube for the best billionaire and CEO romance content. Remember, the official channels are Kay's Sweet Love on YouTube and the My Stories platform. I'll be waiting for you there. With love, Kay.